Hello and welcome. I'm Pearl Howie, and this is my podcast, Pearl Escapes Fear of Success. And the title of this episode, and apologies for it being a little bit crass, is Getting Laid. Yes, I know. But when I was writing the book that preceded this series, Pearl Escapes Fear of Success, I actually came up with a subtitle, which was Getting Fit, Getting Rich, and Getting Laid. What's the problem? Because it was very clear to me that these are three of our biggest fears in life. And so I wouldn't be doing that justice if I didn't do this episode and I didn't give it a slightly rude title. Apologies for that. But I hope you know where I'm coming from now. And this is really about our difficulty on our fear of success when it comes to romantic relationships. And once again, it's one of those areas of life that we know there's a problem because of the supreme amount of self-help books about relationships. We know there's a problem because of all the adverts and everything else that's going on in the world, and how focused we are on romantic relationships, problems with romantic relationships. All of our TV and film has an aspect of that. So let's get into it. Now, if you've listened to or watched the first two episodes, Getting Fit and Getting Rich, what you can probably see is a lot of the things I spoke about in those episodes also relate to fear of romantic relationships, fear of success in romantic relationships. So that's things like time commitment, that's things like broken societal models. So when we look around and we look around for what is what's the kind of relationship that we want to get into, what's the kind of thing we want to be a part of. And very often what we see is something quite fake, or something that's really not that nice. So we need to not judge, but we need to be discriminating. We need to be thoughtful about why we're trying to be a certain way. Very often if we're trying to emulate role models or patterns of behaviour in romance, that may be not what we actually want, or what's actually good for us. And in addition to that, we've also talked about how things affect our relationships with other people, and sometimes feeling guilty for being happy, sometimes feeling guilty for being successful in one area or another. So it can feel kind of mean sometimes when we're so happy and other people around us are not. But what I really want to get into is how one of our big fears of success is fear of loss of success. And that can happen in anything. That can happen even in doing some DIY or our fitness, that we're scared to engage in what we truly want because we're scared of getting it and then losing it. And I don't think there's anywhere that this fear of success is more powerful than when it relates to romantic relationships. And I know that particularly from personal experience. So I want to just kind of walk you through how that looks if you're not aware of it, or if it hasn't been an issue for you. And you might not be watching this for yourself. You might be watching this or listening to this because you're trying to understand why other people in your life seem to have such difficulty. And that's a perfectly valid reason for doing this. You may have been in a relationship for a long time, it may be very successful, and you don't understand why other people have such a problem. So let me just walk you through how this looks. So I spent a long time trying to find the right person. And I've read so many dating books, and I would recommend Susan Jeffers' book, the Feel the Fear Guide to Lasting Love, I think it's called. But what I would say is I disagree with some very important basic premises in that book, because my experience of love and romance is quite different. But there's a lot of what she says in that book that's so useful and helps with modelling a really great relationship. But I read other books that weren't so good as well. And I read books about how I should always leave the house having my nail varnish done. Because it's a bit like business books that tell you sort of, all those little details are the thing that can make you succeed. And in the same way, people apply that to romantic relationships and say, well, as a woman, if you always have your hair done, if you're always wearing makeup and nail varnish and looking your best, you've got a much better chance of meeting the right person and having a romantic relationship. And yes, I looking back, I think that's quite superficial. And to be honest, very often when I met somebody who became very important, became a boyfriend, I was wearing glasses, and they didn't have a problem with it. I wasn't wearing makeup. It could have been very early in the morning on a beach. And yes, I might have been wearing a bikini, and the bikini was quite good. But that doesn't mean to say that that's the reason we got together. I know some people out there are probably shaking their heads going, I think it might have been a big thing. But I think in that situation, if I had just been wearing a t-shirt and shorts, I think, things would probably still have worked out. But I listened to all these books and I read all these books and I looked at all the movies and I did blind dating, I did speed dating, I did every kind of dating, I did online dating. And something always seemed to go wrong. And, sometimes you end up feeling like that person in the romantic comedies who's kind of always single and, a bit Ally McBeal or something like that, everything, or you get kind of picky. And so I went through a period of being quite picky. And I know that during that time, there were lots of times where I walked away from a really good guy. I had a great date with somebody and then I freaked out about something and I disappeared on them. I ghosted them. And if there is such a thing as relationship karma, I deserve that other times when the person turned up for the date and weren't what they said they were, on their profile and that kind of thing. So there was a lot of trial and error, a great deal of trial and error in that. But probably what's more interesting than the times when I showed up and the person was really not right for me were the times when I showed up and the person was right for me. And I could find any reason to walk away from that. I could find any reason to run. And then when I noticed that, and I noticed that pattern, and of course then I got into therapy, and then I got very clear and I said to my therapist, I said, I really want to be in a relationship. I want to be dating. I want to go out with people. And so we agreed that I was going to try and give people more of a chance. I was going to try and go into it. And I did. And I really had to talk myself out of running away, even if I really liked the guy, even if he was perfect. Because in those moments, something inside me always came up with a million reasons to quit. But because I've been going into therapy, because I've been doing so much work, I could kind of look at those reasons and say, well, that doesn't make sense with what I've been saying, with what I've been sitting there saying to my therapist over and over again. So let's look at this again. Let me try harder. And what happened, as I'm sure you can imagine, like with most things where you have a difficulty and you try harder, it got harder. It got harder and harder to not just turn around and run away. And it took me a long time. And eventually I got into relationships, and when the person left, I would be devastated. And there was also a good amount of like life getting in the way as well, of visas getting in the way, of circumstances getting in the way. But I could look at those relationships when they ended and say, you know what? I didn't bail. I didn't run away. So although I felt terrible and I felt, torn apart when that relationship ended, I could say it wasn't, I didn't reenact the same thing over and over again, which I had been doing, of just bailing. And And then I got into another relationship. And again, at the beginning, it was like, I looked at this person, I said, there's every reason not to be in a relationship with this person. There is every reason, because there's an age gap, there's a nationality gap, there is 1,000 miles of difference. There are all the good reasons not to get involved with this person. Am I doing that thing again where I get involved with the wrong person because I'm scared of commitment and whatever? But something inside me knew that this was the right person. And I remember I went away and I meditated, and I meditated on all my previous relationships and what I was doing, and was this sensible or whatever. And the answer that came to me was this, and it was, you have found a diamond, and you don't dispute where you find a diamond. You know, this is a miracle. This is a miracle to find this kind of connection. And so I did my best with that, and he did his best with that. And we had a really strong connection. But then life happened, and we were already dealing with a lot of aspects of life, with the different countries and distance relationship and everything. And then some more life happened, and things got really difficult. And for both of us, there were a lot of stuff that came up to do with loss and relationships and grief and grieving. And neither one of us were immune from that pain of feeling the loss of a connection and a love, even though it wasn't a romantic love. So I'm trying to be very a little bit cryptic here, because this is not just about me, right? But in that losing and that loss, I started to realize that it was the feelings I was feeling were much more about other losses in my life. And I opened my heart up to those feelings from the past. And I actually started to grieve for something that had happened 30 years ago. And I realized, in that process, and then also subsequently dealing with other losses, which I talk about a lot in my books in detail. As I was dealing with those losses, and as I was truly grieving for the stuff that had happened decades ago, I realized why I had had such a difficulty, even way back, with those online dates where I would be sniffy and turn somebody down. Why it had taken me so long to get into that position. And really it was about not the fear of loss, of losing the current romantic relationship. It was not the fear of loss of that success. It was this deep knowing within me that if I lost and started grieving for the current relationship, it would trigger that previous loss. So what it would do is it would make me start to feel the grief that I had not felt, the grief that I had repressed and pushed down, and the losses that I just had no way to process when I was younger. And when I got into experiencing those periods of grief, it's really easy to sort of talk about it and to write it down in a book. But for those of you who have been through any kind of grief, and it's funny, Brené Brown wrote, she writes some great books, and she actually talks about this. She talks about the fact that we cannot selectively numb emotion. So if we are numbing a joyful emotion, we are also numbing our sadness. If we try to numb our sadness, we numb our joy. But what she wrote at the end of this book was that this book was just about for people who had normal grief, not complicated grief. And I thought, well, that really should be at the beginning of the book. But the grief that I was trying to process was extremely complicated, and it wasn't any form of grief when we have loved and lost is difficult. Any type of grief can be traumatic, but complicated grief, and it can be just grieving for somebody with whom we've had a complicated relationship. It can feel almost impossible. It can feel extremely wrong, and for me, that was definitely true. One part of the complicated grief I had to process was for my dad, and I've actually done a YouTube video about complicated grief and denial. And we may have people in our life who we don't like or we didn't like, and then they pass away, and it's very hard for us to process the grief because part of us says, I don't care, I never liked them anyway, don't care, never liked them anyway. And it's that lie that we protect ourselves with. But the problem is that doesn't truly protect us. It may protect us for a time, because it helps us get through the day. A bit like, when we're with coronavirus and there's stuff I go, well, I don't mind about that. I don't care about that. I don't care about I can't do this. I don't care about I can't do that. But really, there's like so many things I miss and that are difficult for me. I just tell myself, well, I've got a nice dinner and I've got, a nice place to live, and so I shouldn't worry about all those other things. And sometimes it's the same with romantic relationships. We tell ourselves, well, it was only a casual relationship anyway. Oh, well, we weren't ever going to end up together anyway. But those losses can still really, really hurt. And in my book, I talk about this in a much more elegant way. But what I realised when I was writing about it, and I was writing about this difficulty with romantic relationships, this fear of loss of success, is that what we do when we can't break through is we imprison ourselves. And so if you're that person who I was, like I was, the serial dater, keep dating people and it keeps breaking up and you feel awful, but then you can't commit, or all the things that we say about people, whether you're male or female, we have a lot of names for people who can't seem to really, commit and everything. But it feels very much like, looking back, I think it was like being kind of in a box, being kind of a prison, and every time you try, it's like you sort of throw yourself at this sort of glass cage and you push the wall back a little bit, or you weaken the wall a little bit. And so every time you try, every time you date, every time you get hurt, you are doing something. You are breaking down those walls, and you are weakening them, and you're getting closer and closer to getting out of it, and to just stopping having that fear of grief, stopping having the fear of experiencing your feelings and the pain that you've been carrying around inside you. And so every time you fail, you succeed. Every time you fail with a romantic relationship, you are trying and you are smashing. And one day, if you keep going, you will break out and you will be able to be free and to be emotionally available. You will be able to be all those words that we use about romantic relationships. You will be ready. You will be prepared to fall in love, to have that romantic relationship, because you're not carrying that dead weight around of that old loss and that old grief. And there is something beautiful about grieving for the past and for those people that we've lost. There's something excruciatingly beautiful about it, because it is the other side of love. It is the pain that comes from the other side of the joy. And recently I was going through a very difficult couple of days, and I went out for a walk, and I found it really hard to get out for a walk. I really found it really hard. And I went and I looked around, and I thought, what's so hard about this? And when I looked around, I looked at it, I thought, the reason this is so hard is because this makes me happy. This makes me feel joy. And when I feel my joy, I don't just feel my joy, I feel all my emotions. And it's what Brené Brown said. When you stop numbing your joy, all the other emotions come up as well. So when I dance and I'm joyful, when I make lovely food and I go, or when I laugh when I watch a program, or when I cry when I watch a film, every time I'm experiencing emotion, I am alive, and I'm feeling more and more alive. And getting out of that state of just numbing and of just living in a world of everything being kind of grey and deadened, really. And it's so important that we come alive, and that we live our emotions, we feel our emotions. But I say that, and I say it from knowing that it took me years, and I couldn't really have experienced those emotions and that grief before I was ready, before I was strong enough. And I had to do an awful lot of work on meditation, on understanding, on forgiveness. And when I talk about, the spiritual principles that I wrote about and mastered on my journey, my Camino de la Luna, which is my courses online in Udemy, each one of those principles I needed, and I needed to understand them in order to get to a place of grieving. So I had to understand forgiveness. I had to understand unconditional love. I had to understand compassion, and how to get out of pity and self-pity into true compassion. And I had to understand courage as well, because it takes a lot, and I think sometimes you look around, especially with romantic relationships, and you see these things where everyone's like, oh yes, everything's so perfect, everything's so lovely. And you may have friends where you experience their relationship, and yes, they do have fantastic relationships, and that's wonderful. But if, like me, you've struggled for a really long time, and you've ever thought, and I definitely thought this so many times, is, what's wrong with me? What's wrong with me? Why do I not fit in this world? Why do I not make sense? Why do my relationships not make sense? Why is it that every time I find someone and get connected with somebody, it feels like they're torn away from me by circumstances? And I'm sure there's a lot of people who've been trying to have relationships during coronavirus who are also feeling like, why me? Why did this happen to me? Just when I met somebody and it was going well, or anything like that. And all I can tell you, and I come at all this stuff not just from a counselling standpoint or anything else, but I also come at it from a mystical viewpoint. And that means that I know that things happen for a reason. And yes, I definitely look back at things and think, why? Why, to the extent of, why did this person get on a train, or why did I get on the wrong train, or why was I late for this? Why did I make that phone call? Why did, all these different things? And all I can tell you is that for me, I have learned, looking back, that it's all happening perfectly. As painful as it may be, I feel like I've got to the bottom of the mystery of my challenges and my challenges of romantic relationships. And I feel like now I could, if I meet someone I like, I've decided this may be a tip you can use very practically. Because one of the things I will say about my last relationship, what was wonderful about it was that it broke all the concepts, so many concepts I had about romantic relationships. People say it takes time to get to know somebody, you have all these kind of rules about things. And I've written about this because when I met him, it was just like, it was magic. And it was the moment of when you meet somebody and you think, yes, this is, wow, I met somebody fantastic. I met somebody great. And I knew that I was meant to meet this person. I knew that it was meant to be. And then, of course, the world's wisdom comes in of all these things of like, oh, no, you can't possibly meet your soulmate. You can't possibly meet somebody, you can't possibly be this because of all the world's rules. And the problem is we use all that to create difficulty for ourselves. We can use that all to strengthen that sort of cage and that thing that we're in. Anyway, I just want to share this thing that I went to the spiritual retreat in Sedona in 2016, yeah. And at this point, me and my last boyfriend, we were really, I think we were still talking. It was nice. We were conversing, but it wasn't really a relationship like that anymore. And I was at this retreat and we were walking around in the morning and somebody said, I just saw it happen. So what do you mean? He said, well, and something happens when you're at a spiritual retreat, or in an amazing place, when you've let down all the walls and you've kind of forgotten all the lies of the society, all the made up stuff. And you're really just walking around being very authentically you, very truthful, very natural. And what happened to these two people was, girl sitting there and the guy walked in and she just turned around and said, where have you been? He said, oh, I'm sorry, I'm late. And they sat down and they were a couple. And it was the first time they'd met. But there was that connection and that recognition because their souls recognized each other. And that's one of the big problems with so much of the stuff we have and our societal models and our, where did you meet? And you have to play the game and you have to go on so many dates and you have to be the same religion or and when souls recognize each other, it's very, very powerful and it's beautiful. And it may be that that's what we're doing all the time, but we just have all the other stuff in the way. So if you've ever experienced that, and it's a wonderful thing to experience or just to see somebody else experience, that's what love can be like. What took you so long? Sorry, I'm here now. And it really can be as simple as that. And I did not believe that until I experienced it, until I saw it. Because I have friends who've had a similar kind of experience where they've met somebody and they've known from the moment they met them, that's it. That's their partner, that's their wife, that's their husband, that's their life partner. And they've known it from the first date. And when you hear that, sometimes you think, what? How did that happen? How could that be possible? But it is possible and it does happen. And I, for one, am waiting for hoping. And one of the things that I've decided I'm going to do, and this is a tip you can have, is that the next time I meet somebody that I like the look of and I think, yes, I'm not going to wait for him to call me or text me. I'm not going to play it safe. I'm not going to do anything dramatic. What I'm going to do is I'm going to say to that person, it's been lovely talking to you. I've had a really nice time. Would you like to go for coffee sometime? Or would you like to go for a drink sometime? That's it. We don't have to make it so complicated. And all of our complicated rules about dating and is he that into you and all the other stuff, I think it's part of the mess we've made of romantic relationships. And in fairness, you know, when we're struggling to come to a clear perspective, and you know, on romantic relationships, we're also dealing with all that baggage, all that stuff, all those emotions we haven't experienced. And really the healing path it's not that complicated, you know, because a lot of what it is it's just about not running away from emotion. It's not about it's just about experiencing an emotion and allowing it to pass. You know, if we're grieving, we need to feel it and allow it to go. The problem can be that sometimes our grief can feel so immense, it can be so huge that, you know, when we, like a sort of like a messy ball, like this, I've got this sort of ball thing up here, and, you know, where do you start? And unfortunately, like when I know that when I was tapping into my grief, it was very difficult because it was unpredictable. So I would that the once I started feeling those feelings, they would sort of come out and come up, and yeah, they were, I had released them, and so they became difficult to handle, and sometimes they came in little bits and sometimes they came in huge waves, and it's not pleasant, it's difficult to feel those emotions and to ride it out, but all I can say is it's worth it. I think it's worth it. And I think that if you are struggling constantly with romantic relationships, it can be definitely worth getting into therapy, definitely worth looking a little bit deeper, you know, but just remember that you're not broken. You know, there's nothing wrong with you. And I used to say this to one of my partners, you know, we are not broken, we're just not finished yet. And it takes time, it takes compassion for ourselves to process our feelings and to let go of a lot of the stuff that comes along with with grief, which is guilt. So when we're grieving, very often we feel a lot of, you know, guilt, we feel recrimination, we feel pain, and that deep longing, you know, for that relationship the way it used to be, or even the way it never was. You know, we might experience grief. So, for example, when I feel grief about my dad, it might be when I see somebody being a great father. You know, I think I never really had that experience of my dad never did this, never took me here, I never got to have that. So sometimes it's in these moments that have nothing to do with us that our emotions come up very powerfully, and we can feel a tremendous sense of loss. And I think it was Helen Keller that said, you know, the only way out is through. And we have to allow, experience, and let go of our emotions and come out the other side. So I hope that helps. And if that doesn't ring true to you, if it doesn't feel like it's whatever issue you might have with romantic relationships, please go check out the book. There's a lot in there, and other stuff might be more useful to you, because there are a lot of different types of fear of success. So there may be issues that you have about even responsibilities, stuff like that. And so when I've talked about this, I wanted to talk about it because I feel it's so important and something that affects, I think, so many of us. But if this doesn't feel right to you, go and check out the rest of the book, because I've hoped to encompass a lot of perspectives, you know. Not each unique fear of success, but definitely types of fear of success. So go check it out. I'll be doing more. And I really hope it helps. And I hope it helps you through. And just remind you guys, if you want to get some discount codes or free codes for the Udemy courses, drop me a line. My email is pearl@pearlescapes.co.uk. I hope this episode helps. It's a really thorny one. It's a one that challenges a lot of people. And unfortunately, what we can do when we're processing this and working through it is that we end up hurting other people because we're not ready for that kind of commitment, or those old demons come up, those old demons of grief and not feeling that we deserve happiness and joy. So remember that when you're doing work on yourself, when you're doing a bit of navel gazing, or as I like to call it, extreme navel gazing, you're not just working on yourself. You're not just helping yourself. You are helping society. We are healing the whole world when we heal ourselves. So never feel that it's not worth it to take that time and look after yourself and try to overcome whatever's challenging you. Okay, take care of yourselves. Remember the videos on YouTube. If you're listening to the podcast, there's a video on YouTube. If you're watching YouTube, there's a podcast on there. Take care. Lots of love. See you soon. Bye.